Max Verstappen has finally truly talked about what happened during the Austrian GP and has hit back at the critics, especially after new evidence and other camera angles appeared to show that the incident in fact could have just been seen as a racing incident. So, what better way to start the weekend than hitting back at the media and critics for blaming you? And that's exactly what Verstappen did as he started the weekend by stating he couldn't give a shit about the criticism he received during Formula One's Austrian Grand Prix, stating his main concern is his friendship with Lando Norris. What's your take on that? Fair play or? Verstappen's robust response drew criticism from many, with McLaren Andrea Stella claiming that the Dutchman only responded in that manner since he had not been penalised for similar instances in 2021. While the collision has sparked much debate, Verstappen has stated he is immune to the criticism. Instead, he stated that it was critical that he spoke with Norris to go over the events since his objective was to ensure that the incident would not jeopardise their close friendship. Asked about the criticism over recent days, Verstappen said, "I don't give a shit about that. I go home, I live my life, and the only thing that I care about is just my relationship to Lando." Verstappen stated that the duo chatted on Monday and, after going over everything that had occurred, they decided to continue racing in a similar tough manner in the future. "I think we came to the conclusion that we actually really enjoyed our battle," he said. "We looked at the incident and it was such a silly little touch that had, of course, great consequence for both of us. But we like to race hard. We've done this for many years, not only in Formula One, even like online racing where we had a lot of fun together. These things have to carry on because that's what we like to do. And I think it's great for Formula One as well." With Norris softening his criticism of Verstappen ahead of the British Grand Prix, the Dutchman indicated that they agreed on practically every element of their dispute. "We agree with 99% of everything," he said. "And naturally, I always said to Lando, when you go for moves at the inside, the outside, you can trust me that I'm not there to try and crash you out of the way. It is the same the other way around because we spoke about that as well. Naturally, there's always a human reaction when someone dives on the inside or outside that you have a bit of a reaction to it. But I felt everything that I did was nothing massively over the top. Of course, like how you design the car, you try to go to the edge of the rules. Maybe you find some grey areas here and there like with the car, and that's the same how you race, because otherwise you will never be a top driver and you will never succeed in life anyway." Verstappen was heard on the radio moaning about Norris dive-bombing him, but he claims it was more about getting the FIA to interfere to aid his own cause. "You always speak for your own advantage," he said with humour. "That's what he did. That's what I did. We all understand that." Asked how the pair would approach racing each other in the future, Verstappen said, "We go at it flat out. That's what we agreed to, because that's what we like to do. That's what's good for Formula One as well." Verstappen wasn't the only one at the start of the race weekend to comment on what had happened only a couple of days ago, and as they say that time heals all wounds. Lando Norris's comments during his Austrian Grand Prix race-deciding altercation with Max Verstappen were far harsher than his comments now, expressed with the benefit of hindsight and distance from the event. So, after all, it was just a storm in a bottle? Let's compare some of the comments so we can figure out what they expect in the future. Norris used the phrases reckless and desperate in Austria to describe Verstappen's strong efforts to maintain the lead heading into Turn 3. The Briton told Sky that, "If he says he did nothing wrong, then I will lose a lot of respect for that," implying that his buddy and opponent was entirely to blame for the confrontation. Norris's heart had changed somewhat 4 days later. There were still misgivings in his subsequent breakdown of the event, primarily over the concept of moving under braking, but Norris now believes that the collision was the consequence of near-to-the-edge racing rather than exceeding the restrictions. "I honestly don't think he needed to apologise. Some of the things I said in the pen after the race were more just because I was frustrated at the time," Norris recalls. "A lot of adrenaline, a lot of emotions, and I've probably said some things I didn't believe in, especially later on in the week. It was a pretty pathetic incident in terms of what ended both our races. It wasn't like an obvious bit of contact. It was probably one of the smallest bits of contact you could have, but with a pretty terrible consequence for both of us, especially for myself. As a review, a good race, at times very close to the edge, but we've spoken about it and we're both happy to go racing again." That's not to say there was no lingering frustration. Norris said of Verstappen's defence that, "At times I thought maybe a bit too far. Felt that in terms of what they could do differently, avoiding an incident from moving under braking is probably the biggest part of it, and was still baffled by the fact he'd received a penalty for a 4th track limits offence for a failed overtake after which he ceded position. That's just common sense, that's pretty silly to be honest. But the tone of his answers, the intentional long pause and accompanying stifled smirk when asked if Verstappen had apologized, showed this was Norris as his usual jovial self, and that means his comments were to be taken at face value. "Some of the things I said in the pen after the race were more just because I was frustrated at the time," said Norris. "A lot of adrenaline, a lot of emotions, and I probably said some things I didn't necessarily believe in. It was tough. It was a pretty pathetic incident in terms of what ended both of our races. It wasn't a big hit. It wasn't an obvious bit of contact. It was probably one of the smallest bits of contact you could have, but with a pretty terrible consequence for both of us, especially for myself. I don't expect an apology from him. I don't think he should apologize. I thought it was, as we reviewed, good racing. At times, maybe very close to the edge. But we've spoken about it, we've talked about it, and we're both happy to go racing again." Initially claiming that he was out of room on the track's edge, Norris later admitted that he could have taken a little more margin over the curb on the left to avoid the incident, but added that, "There's things from both sides that I'm sure we wanted to do better in a slightly different way." Whenever there is a high-profile incident on the track, especially when two drivers lock horns in the battle for victory, a frenzy will likely ensue across all channels. Reviewing the incident today, without the implicit context, is different from watching it 5 days earlier. At the time, the event was the culmination of a heated on-track battle that threatened to become ugly. It was the climax of everything that had come before it after the final series of stops, and it was completely preventable, although Norris subsequently thought that he could have shifted slightly to the left. A crash between the championship leader and a newly minted first-time winner who is considered an outsider. There is only one story in town at that moment, and it will undoubtedly be thoroughly examined. In the spirit of rigorousness, let us go over it again. And, without context, it is such a meaningless occurrence. It's a great example of two drivers that hardly overlap yet have the most dramatic results. Norris does, according to his subsequent comments, have some freedom to take more curb on the left-hand side. Verstappen, for his part, may have gone slightly inwards, but it's fair to conclude that the Dutchman isn't expecting a move to his left. His head does not give the telltale indication of a small look to his left. His gaze is locked on the apex that far into the move already. There is a move under braking which Verstappen resorted to in a number of his defensive forms, but it is not wholly reactive. There is a distinction between moving under braking and moving to take the line to open the corner. Given Verstappen's prior infractions in his career, it's subject to malicious interpretation. But one might argue that this was just done to enhance his corner exit. Verstappen received a 10-second penalty for the incident, but it had no influence on his 5th place finish because he was more than enough ahead of Nico Hülkenberg. Whether it was worth a penalty or not is up to the steward's discretion, on another day with somewhat different and lower repercussions. The book may have ended with "racing incident" penciled in. Did the media overreact? At the time, probably not. It was a high-profile occurrence that deserved to be covered fully. With time and the opportunity to reassess, the decision may alter somewhat. Everyone has an opinion about anything, and when it comes to racing, which is mainly subjective, it is best to name it as one deems appropriate. But it's always beneficial to re-examine anything with new eyes. Perhaps Daniel Ricciardo best captures the scene, having seen it from the outside. "I think the outcome was bigger than probably what was actually happening on the track," the Australian said. "From what I saw, at least nothing seemed over the top. Was it pushing the edge? Probably. But was anything dangerous or reckless? At least from what I've seen, no." What's your thoughts on all of this now it has reached full circle? Will they fight again this weekend? Or will they take it easier from now on? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.